Hello and welcome back. It's the end of the week, and what a better way to spend your Friday than with us and Boyfriend Dungeon. I'm so excited about today's stream. I'm actually overly excited because today's stream is very special to me. This is one of the first games I ever backed before I even joined the gaming industry. So now it's like a kind of a dream come true for me to actually be here talking to the creators. But welcome. This is Creator Spotlight. I'm your host, Carol. I'm so glad you guys have joined us all summer long for this great series. I hope you're really enjoying it, where we're interviewing all our favorite Made with Unity creators. This is my co-host, Hassan. How are you today?
Hello, I'm doing great. I'm Hassan, community manager at Unity and co-host on the Creator Spotlight series. I'm also extremely excited for today's show. You know, Carol and I are both from Montreal, and the game we're entering today is a Montreal indie darling.
Represent.
So we can't wait to just showcase what our city has to offer, and we're super proud of this game. It comes from our city, and we can't wait to showcase it.
Yeah. So should we just jump into it? Should we just show the trailer?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do it.
Whoa. Well, hello, you two. Name's Sunder.
Isaac Brooks. Pleased to make your acquaintance.
Careful, don't tickle my hilt. Hey.
Hey.
Well, hello.
Hi!
Yo. Good day.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Kitfox game team. So glad to have you here. How are you, Tanya?
Thank you. Good. I'm much less stressed than I thought maybe I would be today, but still lots to do.
Yeah.
Congratulations on your launch about 2 days ago. Is that right?
Thank you.
A surprise drop of the game.
It's been almost 48 hours. Yes.
Amazing. So how's that been?
It's been really good. We weren't sure what to expect exactly. I mean, as a business developer, I try to predict sales as best I can, and I had lots of spreadsheets and things. But I mean, it's hard because on the one hand, the last time we released a game was actually Lucifer Within Us almost a year ago, and it sold not great, and that's a very common story these days of thinking, well, the ecosystem has changed, there's a lot more games out there, there's a lot more noise and competition, and the last big game that we had developed and released ourselves, Moon Hunters, was back in 2016, and yeah, there's just a lot less competition. There was a lot fewer games coming out every day. Indies were less active on Twitter, so we had more of an advantage there. But we ended up selling more units on Steam, well, around almost exactly, in fact, the same number of units on Steam in one day for Boyfriend Dungeon than we did for the first week of Moon Hunters.
Nice.
So given that it also has a higher price point, that means basically it looks like we're on track to sell 10 times as much, which is a nice feeling for sure.
Nice. Yeah, congrats. But let's take a step back. Let's introduce everyone on this street. Tanya, tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Tanya X Short. I'm the captain of Kitfox Games. And on Boyfriend Dungeon, I was the lead designer, writer, producer, and business developer marketer, I guess.
Yeah, and today community manager / social media manager as well.
Just doing it all.
Thank you for joining us. Marcelo, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Marcelo. I'm CTO and lead programmer on Boyfriend Dungeon. I'm all the tech part of the game. And yeah, I'm also very happy with the result that we've been having with Boyfriend Dungeon. To me, it's also a dream come true to be able to launch this game and see people play it, it's
Yeah.
crazy because like this game has run so many times on my computer, and now like I see people playing. It's so weird. But yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Running on other people's computers now, all around the world.
Do you feel precious a little bit? You're like, oh no, I've let it go into the world, and my child is not my child anymore.
Yes. Oh my God, I felt that so much. I felt like we had built this baby, and now this baby was gonna be judged. But yeah, so far the reception has been pretty good, so I'm happy about that.
Okay, yeah. I think the reception has been always good. I think I mentioned it right before the stream, and it's like there's been a lot of hype around this game. It's a very unique kind of concept. It definitely took people by surprise, and it had a very like viral kind of concept to it. But it's actually a very deep and wonderful game. So, and we'll get into that. So, Tanya, why don't you explain what the game is, and we can take a little bit of some footage of how we play it.
Sure. So Boyfriend Dungeon is a dungeon crawler, first and foremost, but it's also a dating game. So you are in Verona Beach, California, and you have to, make some money and meet some people. You have this problem that you've never been on a date before. Mm-hmm. And your cousin very kindly lends you his apartment because he's moving in with his significant other. And he says, okay, you can use my apartment for the summer, rent free. And I'm going to set you up with some dates. You're going to meet some people, and let's build some confidence. That's the best thing you can do if you're having trouble dating is get a little more confidence, probably. Assuming you're not on the other side of the scale. But for the purposes of this game, you don't have enough confidence. Okay. And so you go into the dungeon and you find some cool weapons, and then they turn into beautiful people. And you take them on dates and hopefully find friendship or love or just have a good time.
Yeah, I actually really love the concept of that game that, there's so many dating games. Dating games have existed in some crazy world iterations for many, many years. So I thought I knew going into it because it's one of my secret guilty pleasure genres that I really love to play since I was like 12 years old or something like that when they were on like Newgrounds or something like that. But like, I was really surprised at like the depth of the characters. I thought they were, I was sold for this game already, but there was a lot of like nuances to you as a character playing them, and there's surprisingly realistic. I always find it so hard to play games where there's like texting involved because I'm always like, that's not how real people text. But this game, I found myself oftentimes being like, oh, this is exactly how people text. And it's so funny and it's so weird and it's so invested because of that.
Thank you. That's really lovely to hear. We definitely went through a lot of iterations, and it helped having some really amazing writers help with a couple of the characters as well. Like Dagger was drafted primarily by Meg Giant, who's an incredible writer, and Hammer, who isn't in the game yet, but we're working on her. She's also drafted by Jill Murray, who's an amazing writer, and having them also, and a few other people like Christine Love also played the game and gave her feedback, and just having. I think the 4 years was actually really helpful for that, because as a writer, it's really hard to have fresh eyes on what you're making. It's not like a procedural dungeon. You can just like pick up the controller again and sort of feel like, okay, is this dungeon working? And you could get fresh eyes because it's procedural and it's adaptive and dynamic. And it's not like you're literally playing the exact same rooms all the time. But for narrative, like really trying to figure out like, does this scene feel good? You have to give it a few months for your mind to like relax and forget what it's like and see it with fresh eyes. And it's just much, much harder to play test, I think. So the time and amazing collaborators really helped for us to polish the characters.
Yeah.
And so how did you go about that? I wonder, like, did you do exactly that? Look at something, take time away from it, look back? Or did you have to trust in in your playtest and like getting advice, I guess, sentiment from different people who are playtesting the game?
It was definitely a mix. For my personal, but there a little bit of it is taste. Like, I know we were sort of agonizing towards the beginning about my personal taste. I get kind of restless if there's dialogue in a game that lasts longer than about 5 minutes. Like, I love reading books. I read books for a long time every day, but when I'm sitting at my computer, I do not want to just be clicking on yeah, or even choices. I don't know. I want to go beat up some monsters after a few minutes. But we would get some feedback sometimes where they're like, oh, well, this scene, it feels too short. Like, I wanted more time. And I had to very carefully take that and interpret it like other playtesting feedback of like, well, what are they actually saying?
Yep.
And am I willing to make this scene longer? Or does it just mean that this scene is not satisfying when it ends? Or that this character's response hints that they wanted to say more, and that feels bad. Like, there's so many reasons why a scene, you might want it to keep going. And figuring out the emotional state of the player in some ways is more important than actually doing exactly what they're asking for in that case.
Yeah, that's so important. You're totally right. I actually kind of forgot about that. And there is a trope in these type of narrative games where there's just an intense amount of like info dumping in the beginning of games. And it really, I find, takes away from the experience. I tend to do like exactly you said, I just start saying yes and going through and really fast. And I sometimes miss like some cues and whatnot. But this game never felt that way. It felt like how you actually text in real life. So that was great.
You spend half an hour thinking of what to say next, then you
Yeah, I go fight a
and then
dungeon.
overthinking.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually helps in this particular game that there are 7 different characters to romance, and then also there's like the protagonist and a couple of other characters, or sorry, the cousin character, which is like the tutorial progression character, and a couple of others, because I could that helped keep it fresh. That I would work on a character for a couple of months, and then another character for a couple of months, and by the time I cycled back to the first character, it would be 6 months to a year, and it would be very fresh. So in some ways, the scope was helpful, even if maybe it was still kind of foolish.
I think what caught so many people's eye in the game, obviously, is that main hook, right? Like dating your weapons. I'm just wondering, this isn't your first game. How long was this idea sitting with you before you actually got to start working on it? Was this something that was an idea you had in your mind? You're like, I'm going to work on this one day, or did it come up right after working on your previous game?
Well, so I've loved dating sims and RPGs and dating sim RPGs since forever. I remember trying to download a fan sub of Tokimeki Memorial like back in 1999 or whatever, and it didn't work. I was very sad, but that's an indication of the kind of interests that I have.
Yeah.
And so I remember in grad school as a level designer around 2007, I remember thinking, I really want to make a dating sim RPG where I can date everyone. That was really what I wanted to make. I remember telling my partner at the time, we've been together for a long time, and in 2007 I was like, well, by the time I'm a lead designer, probably that'll be like a whole genre. So probably I won't get to make it, but that's okay, because then I'll have all those games to play. And I was like comforting myself. But then Kitfox was in a situation in 2017 where we had been doing some client work, and it had been canceled suddenly with no warning. And so we didn't have anything to work on. And I had been joking with the team, like, oh, what if we made a game where you could date whoever? And it was called Boyfriend Dungeon, because that'd be hilarious. And I was like, well, why don't we just make that game? It's a joke. It'll just be a little game. It won't take very long.
Marcel.
It didn't take very long, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's something about when a game is lighthearted, you just assume it won't take as long for some reason.
I see. Yeah.
It's also like when you think about like writing like comedy looks so easy when it's good that you think it doesn't take as long to make as a drama, but it takes just as long or longer to make good comedy. Like, comedy writers are incredible. But anyway, to answer your question a little more succinctly, I'd had the idea for a long time of a dating sim RPG where I could date various genders. But the part about it being weapons actually came in when we started working on it. It was both how do we differentiate this game? How do we make it more approachable for the average gamer who might not be interested in dating men? And what do we do about characters not being in the dungeon? Because we don't really, we knew it was going to be a small game. We were like, oh, if it's a weapon, that solves all those problems.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was almost like a joke. I remember I was like, well, what if you were dating your weapon? And everyone laughs. And we're like, no, actually.
That's actually
It's a
genius.
really good idea.
I love that. So you knew the genre of the game you wanted to make. It was like a kind of a dream of yours, but then the actual hook came from like creative problem solving of trying to make it work in the modern day, right? And to kind of stand out from
Yeah,
other
I mean,
games
it was
genre.
obvious. The name Boyfriend Dungeon, like by itself, is a hook,
Yeah,
right? Like when we were on the PAX floor, we could hear frat bros like from coming from the Xbox, or they'd be like, "What Boyfriend Dungeon?" Ha ha ha! And then they'd go look.
But what is it?
And so being able to also like, oh, you can play it as a joke because you're dating your weapons, like that really opens a lot of doors. We noticed that was how a lot of people approached Hatoful Boyfriend and sort of kept an open mind.
Right.
And I think helping people approach your game with an open mind is a big challenge sometimes, but it definitely helped our game, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Sorry, go ahead, Hassan.
No, you go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we mentioned a lot about dating, and especially for women, if there's something, I know that the early dating sims that I played really felt like they were geared towards men, but I really enjoyed playing and dating, women. And I think this game is interesting because it also subverts a lot of the people that I've introduced this game to were men who were like that kind of, I don't want to like stereotype all Xbox players, but they were like, oh, this is like kind of a joke. And then they were surprisingly would come to me and be like, oh, well, I actually really liked Sunder. And, and they were thinking about it so intensely and reflecting on their own behavior. And to me, that is like, I love subverting the kind of like genres and the types of people who play games, where it's already difficult for women to enter these spaces, or not just women, but just non-binary people as well being well represented. And that's fine. But for me, the best thing is if you have allyship with people who otherwise would never kind of touch these games. So I'm like really happy to see that kind of reaction as well.
Thank you.
So many people in the chat are just like mentioning how clearly so many have played the game in the chat, and they're all mentioning how amazing the writing is, calling the writing top notch. They're all recommending it to their friends.
Thank you.
So clearly there's a strong narrative design in this game, and I'm just wondering about your thoughts about this state of narrative games now. You just said you thought that the genre would be dominated by these kinds of games by the time you got to make it, but what is the actual state of the genre?
I mean, it's a wonderful time to be interested in indie games. And I think part of that is the narrative side, because I feel like at a certain scale, when you have thousands of employees, like if Kitfox were a megacorp across multiple countries and had thousands of employees, there is a huge risk in making a one playthrough completely linear game, like a narrative-based game itself is a risk of a type. Like multiplayer and infinite and hundreds of hours, those aren't the kinds of things that suit narrative. And so in some ways it's becoming more and more indie dominated, and that's where you find the interesting stories and the more I would say more faceted stories. But I do think part of that also is because there also is becoming more diversity of people making games, which is great because of more approachable tools. And it's not just Unity. I've seen a big group of people coming up playing using Godot as well, which is interesting. I haven't tried it myself yet. But Twine was famously a great way for people to make their first game and approach it from a narrative angle. And in my off time, which I have not very much of, but in my off time, I'm also the co-director of Pixels, which helps women and marginalized genders make their first games of whatever type they want. And we found that a lot of times they are drawn to narrative and they're more interested in that than maybe making a platformer. Some of them are obviously making whatever games. It's not 100%, but it is interesting to see that when you put the tools in hands of more kinds of people, you're going to get more kinds of games.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for that as a player because I love a good narrative. And I think you've seen a lot of award-winning, interesting little narratives the last few years. But I think that's just going to get more and more integrated with different kinds of games and genre and gameplay over the next few years. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's great to see you like push that genre forward and also to give back to the community in that way. It's really fantastic. I would love for us to now, since we're talking about narrative, for us to kind of dive into the editor and look at how you actually implemented all of this, how you put it all together. I believe we're going to look at Marcelo's screen right now, so we'll jump to that screen share.
So what character are we going to show off,
exactly.
Marcelo?
Yeah.
We could show Scythe.
Okay.
Scythe? Okay, cool. Is
So
that a fan
Scythe,
name?
I guess we'll start with Scythe's narrative. So they are a non-binary weapon who initially starts out sort of threatening you a little bit. They're the closest thing we have to the Tsundere trope, I would say. But one thing that I thought was really successful in the way we made the game was this narrative tool. So right now, what you're looking at is the script that I write that becomes the interactions in the game. So you can see that there's the different columns for the different types of input, but the main thing the player sees is the dialogue column. So you can see, or I should actually have the stream open. It's hard to read from this perspective, but those are the things that the character says or the narrator says. And when I first started working on the game, I still was writing in Word documents. It's very common for writers to feel like you have to do certain things to unlock the writer side of your brain. You have to be in a certain state of mind. You have to drink coffee or whatever else. But for this, I actually, after a couple of months, I got used to writing directly into the spreadsheet, which any writers in the chat will know that is a big, big step. It was just fluid enough that I could do that. So the way it works is you can see in the next column, it's basically just a through line. We knew when we came to this game that we would need longer interactions than Moon Hunters, and we would need not extensive branching. Now, we maybe underestimated that a little bit. Some of these branches get a little bit gnarly in some of the scenes, but for 90% of cases, this was sufficient complexity. And then in the effects column, you see all the different things that could happen in a node, which that became pretty extensive over time, but still relatively readable, relatively easy to see when something's gone wrong.
And so this one spreadsheet is one conversation, or is it like one scene? How like?
So this is one conversation with Scythe. We tend. I can't see, which one do you actually have open?
Have pickup open.
Pickup. Okay. Yeah. So for that one, that is just the first time you meet them. But if you go to date 1 or date 2, for example, you can see that there's a text message and then it's followed by an invitation, and then it's followed by the actual date. So multiple encounters can be in the same document. It's just for readability purposes that we broke them up into separate sheets so that they're easier to find. But so for this one, for example, you get the first message after the first date. It's just a follow-up to say the first date was over. I'm texting you, basically. And then there's an invitation to say, let's have a second date when that's ready. And then the actual second date is there and starts when you go to the mansion. But the main problem with this is that the errors that can happen, there's a few different errors we immediately saw were very, very easy to make. So for example, what if one of the words in next doesn't actually lead anywhere? Like there's no corresponding place that can go. So right now you can see that let's see, what do you have highlighted? You have appraise highlighted. So if there were no appraise in the label column on the left, like that would just be a dead end, and the date would be over. And that would be a major problem, obviously. So this gets converted into a CSV, and then we also have an error checker that Marcelo and Kira made, which I guess Marcelo can explain a little bit more.
Yeah, so the error checker, well, here in the editor we have a storyline object, which I will find sites storyline. And so the error checking happens a few times in the game. And one of them is in the editor itself. So it's maybe a bit hard to see here, but once you load up Scythe's storyline, it will go through all the text assets that we have here, which are the tabs. They correspond to the tab CSVs in that sheet that we just saw. And it will go and analyze all the problems in the date. So, or the ones that we can detect automatically. And so, for example, since most of it is not red, when nothing is red, it means that the date is fine. But in some cases, for example, a choice is more than 35 characters. This is like a localization issue. Like it might, go overflow depending on the language. Couldn't find this video, things like that. So because like we launched the game recently, there's not a lot of errors here. Most of them don't do anything. But
when I first write a draft of a date, there are inevitably 5 or 10 red lines that I go through and check.
Yeah. And for a long time, we had to like go through the sheet here. And once Tanya would update or like make changes or make a new sheet, we would actually have to download the CSV and add it to the project as a CSV file. Until at some point we created a tool that from here we created a Kitfox menu, update CSV, and then we can automatically update from Google Drive into and import the CSV automatically to the editor.
Rather than drag and drop it each time.
Yeah, that
you have to do that the first time still to register it into the system, but then for updating it uses that.
Yeah, and this is it's a Google Script service that we have a localization plugin that we use called i2, and it's great. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it has like it comes with a web service template that it uses to be able to update the localization as well. We can show that too, because that's a big part of our game as well, is like localizing all of this text into several different languages.
And we knew we'd have to do that from the beginning.
Yeah. And that's also why this column exists, the string ID. It's because we need a unique identifier for every string in the game. And so the final identifier for the string will be like a combination of the weapon plus which tab it is plus the string ID. And then this all goes into our localization sheet. So anyway, this plugin called i2, it comes with a template for a web service that creates this localization sheet and updates it automatically. So what I did is I went there and changed this web service to also have the possibility of downloading our CSVs. So that's how this came into life. So the current workflow is once we make changes to a date here, we update it through here, and basically the game will become aware of the changes, and it will consult i2 for localizing the strings.
And so the localization happens like you're not doing that in another like Google Drive. It's happening more in Unity, like in the editor.
Yeah. So the plugin called i2, it has an asset file basically that contains all the keys. So here I could, for example, select only Scythe's keys, and we'll see all the keys here. And these correspond to like date 1, string 25. So in English, this is what it looks like, and then in all the other languages are down here. and the plugin, it goes and it has a corresponding data in Google Sheets, but what the game actually uses when running is the asset here, so it can update from the sheet.
And when doing this localization, did you have to work with writers who spoke in those languages? Because maybe the conversation structure or certain things might like come off of it differently.
Yeah, I mean, we work individually with individual translators for each language. So that has its upsides and downsides. On the upside, it's slightly cheaper than working with a something that has a lot of middlemen and managers and overhead and things like that. But the downside is sometimes it can be very taxing. Like it's a big game. It's over 100,000 words. So it takes the translator a while. And they have to write in a lot of different voices, which you have to be a type of translator for that, right? And I think most translators are writers. I think it's just a question of what type of writer are they? Are they more of a technical writer? Are they more of a dialogue writer? And it can be difficult. I know, especially for a game with a lot of humor in it, it can be a particular challenge, but also a particular joy. Like I was just talking with a translator for a game that we're releasing. Sometimes we're publishing Paparazzi, and sorry, this is a translation tangent, but I just think it's so amazing. There's a dog that skateboards in Paparazzi that you take pictures of, and he's called Tony Bark.
Of course.
And the Turkish translator was like, Tanya, you're not going to believe this, but the word for bark in Turkish is hav. So I made him Tony Havk. It's actually better than the original. I was like, wow, that's amazing.
That's so sweet. I love that.
Obviously, some types of translators are really into that, and others aren't. You just have to find the right translators for your project.
Okay. That makes sense. So you'll get some like happy moments like that, but it of course takes a certain amount of effort of working with each and every one of those translators.
Yeah, and I mean, we worked with mostly the same translators as we did for our past projects. We have sort of a stable now of the languages we tend to do, because those markets tend to be interested in our types of games, like Germany and Japan and Brazilian Portuguese tends to do pretty well for us, and Chinese and I already said Japanese. Anyway, and so those translators, I think we have all the same translators as we did for Lucifer Within Us, and maybe even Moon Hunters. Yeah.
I was wondering, so for devs who are looking to get into making a narrative game or story game, they might be wondering why do it in Google Drive? Why not do the dialogue directly in Unity first rather than having to step back and forth? I'm just wondering, why go through that process?
So there are multiple reasons. I liked that the Google Sheets was very, very accessible even to contractors that we had. So for example, our collaborator who was writing on Dagger, I could just send her a link to the Dagger spreadsheet and she could easily look at that without needing to worry about getting onto our repo and our SVN and all that kind of thing. I also liked that it was very accessible anywhere. Like even if I was on a potato computer that I didn't really trust to open the editor at all, I could still sort of do some light editing work. And I also think like if what I really need is word processing, basically, like I should probably be using a word processor. Like we could try to make this Google Sheet in Unity, but why do that? Like what I really need to do is just edit large volumes of text, and Unity was made to edit large volumes of data and data objects. So I think that this is more flexible for our purposes.
Great. It's also more focused that way. Yeah, while you're on a plane, light laptop.
Yeah, exactly.
Type of way. Yeah.
I'm not even joking. I sometimes would work like this on a plane, and it would be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, well, with all the events you were going to in the past, it makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious then so like knowing that Marcelo, there's like really popular like Yarn Spinner exists for dialogue systems as well. Like, did you ever at a point go, we see this a lot where like a game director or there's a creative vision and they really want to have a specific tool. So there's custom tools being built, but there are actually existing tools or plugins as well. It's like, how did you manage that? Like when Tanya said, and like, I really want to work in a spreadsheet, was that a decision that we made together? Or you were like, okay, I'm going to we're gonna like work on making a custom tool that has this better workflow for the entire team?
So when I joined the project, the tool was already there. Basically, I was still working on Moonhunters for a little while, and the work on Boyfriend Dungeon had started, and with the other programmers at the time, and they decided this. So I wasn't part of that discussion. I don't know if Tanya has other comments on this, but what so basically I tried to adapt as much as like for our needs the existing tool, but I wasn't part of the decision there. Do you remember how this was decided, Tanya?
I remember we looked at a few options, and remember this is 2017, so there were plenty of tools available, but I don't remember which ones were the top ones other than ink, which I knew wasn't good for localization, that it would be, I'd already heard it was a big headache to localize with ink. I know that we had been burned by plugins a bit with Moonhunters, and we were very shy to base the core of our game on a plugin because of that. And I know we just recently had to do some updates hurriedly with Rewired, but I think that was probably still worth it. That's the closest thing to a plugin at the core of the game, and it's still a little scary.
Yeah, no, totally understandable. Are you going to use this tool for any of your future? Are you using it for any of your future games?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, if it has the same things that we want to do, like it's a very, like for Moonhunters, we actually did work in Unity because they were relatively simple binary choices. It was just like, you have two choices and like 2 or 3 follow-ups, and like at most there's like 15 like bubbles of text. I don't have a screenshot of that available, but that had a very different use case, a very different technical requirements than this. If I made another game, I don't know, Boyfriend Kitchen or something, where you have chats with people that are 3 to 5 minutes long and relatively linear, then this tool would make sense. But if they're quite a bit shorter or quite a bit longer or quite a bit more branching or quite a bit more dynamic, like there's a bunch of reasons why it might not be usable. So it depends on the project.
Okay, cool. Yeah, super interesting. Thank you for letting us know.
Can't wait to date my fridge and
that exists. You're late, Hassan.
So yeah, for everyone watching, Boyfriend Dungeon isn't just like a dating narrative game. It's also a dungeon crawler, as in the title. So you had to build a physics system for the game, right? And combat. So we're gonna look into that, but we're gonna keep looking at the Scythe, the character, to showcase the combat in the game. But so I'd love to see the physics system, which you can show us about that approach with the game.
Yeah, sure. I can show you a little bit. So we're gonna go into the mall. Sorry, I'm using like all the debug tools here. But yeah, basically for this game, we chose to create our own physics system. And by physics system, we just mean like collision detection and like, basically just to make a character move around, like when they can, certain areas they cannot go through, and also like during combat, like what is a hitbox and what is a detection box and things like that. We decided to do that because we were a little bit burned by Moonhunters as well. It was something we learned in the past project because we used Unity physics, and for the type of thing that we were doing, which was to random generation or procedural generation of the levels, there were certain things that was very hard to optimize. So for example, like the borders of the levels and stuff, like we have to create colliders for everything. And that's more or less optimizable, but for other objects that we would spawn in the middle of the chunks, they would create, each one would create like colliders, and that would all like be very difficult to optimize and unify different colliders into one, for example. And what would happen is we would end up with so many colliders, and the performance was not acceptable. And even to this day, like we tried to optimize as much as we could, But even to this day, like there are certain platforms or lower end hardware that struggle with the amount of colliders that we have. And that was a very difficult thing to erase or like optimize, because we would just see that there was a lot of collision detection happening and in the profiler, and we just didn't see a way to optimize that. So for this one, oh, sorry. Or let me just check something. Sorry. Wow.
You can't have a stream without
So, yeah,
it, live stream without that happening. That's pretty classic.
Yeah.
So this time we tried to make it like as simple as possible, like the least processing as possible for the collision detection. So we created our own collision system, which basically is, they're mostly, for the most part, they're just circles. So characters are circles, enemies are circles, projectiles are circles. And this way we can just check the radius, and if the radius is in the same area, or like if it reaches the next one, we know there's a collision. And there's, there's very little processing there. So most of our collision is done just with circles. For walls, it's more complicated, so then we have different shapes. And that takes a little bit more processing. But I just wanted to show you the gizmos here. So you can see, oops. So you can see here, this up. You can see here that the wall is different, but my character has just a little collision thingy. Turn, wow, there's so much.
Did you make 3D icons smaller?
Okay, well.
Yeah, 3D icons at the top if you make those really
there
small.
There you go. Thank you so much. So you can see like the walls have different shapes, and they have like elongated shapes, but they're also calculated with some circle code.
Interesting.
But our character is a circle, and also you can see like all the projectiles, they're all circles, and all the enemies are circles, and the objects are circles. Everything is done like that, and that gives us like super fast performance.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
and so even the slashes, like the main attacks,
yeah,
will also be
all
spawning a quick circle.
Exactly. And this is done in a 2D space. So like it's tilted here, but the calculation is done in a 2D space. So with this, like all this work, by the way, was done by Kira, which is our combat expert, and she's amazing. And oh my god, this project could not have been done without her.
Nice. Shout out to Kira.
Shout out to
I mean,
Kira.
for 3.5 years of development, it was just Marcelo and Kira.
Oh wow!
Like as far as our programming team, it was.
Oh wow! Really? Okay.
Yeah, we had, and Kira is 3 days a week as well. So we had like 1.6 programmers, me and an artist. That was the whole Boyfriend Engine team for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Oh, so how about we shout out the whole team by name?
Yeah.
On Boyfriend Engine.
All right. So we can start with Kira.
Yeah.
Kira Boom.
You're
She's
amazing.
Snow Kitty Kira on Twitter, I believe. Yes, she's incredible. She is responsible for a lot of the really good polish on the game. She's very into game feel and making things proper. I remember, Marcella, you sent me a message a couple of years ago that was like, Kira's code is so beautiful.
Oh, I love
So
that.
sweet.
Oh my
That's so
gosh.
sweet.
True.
And they're right. Like the feel of the game is amazing. There's just a tactility, even something as quick as like the fighting mechanics. I think feel really good. It's very responsive too. Sometimes these games can like even like a tiny little millisecond off can like really take away from the game, and it feels very, very nice.
Thank you. I mean, part of that also is the other team member that's not here, or full-time team member that's not here right now, which is Sin Ran Liu. He's the art director, and he not only did the majority of the art, we outsourced the transformation sequences, so the animations, and then also the background illustrations, but he did the characters, the interface, the environments, and he's very, very technical as well. So he actually assembled pretty complicated chunk assets for the dungeon a lot of the times as well. And this game wouldn't be anywhere near where it is without Sin. Sin is worth 3 or 4 different artists with his amazing talents. And a lot of that polish is because of him as well. He can just go in there and make the game better just by breathing on it, it seems like sometimes.
I love that somebody in chat is like, the art design is fire, 10 out of 10 abs. Literally, I count 10 abs.
But yeah, in the past 8 months, we've also been joined by Merdad Dedashti.
Mm-hmm.
He helped. He spearheaded the Xbox and Windows Store ports, and also did various wonderful coding as well.
Great guy, all around.
Yeah, amazing guy. Yeah, he's going to be really helping with the DLC development as well. And Taya Kent is the 2D artist that has started taking over a lot of Sin stuff lately. So she's an awesome illustrator, and she's getting in there and concepting what might be more characters or more dungeon or something in the future.
Oh, I'm so glad there's going to be more content. Ooh.
Maybe. I mean, we
Yeah,
promised
really
that there will be some more content. I'm just not supposed to be telling you what it is. Besides Hammer and Axe. We owe Hammer and Axe. You know that much.
Yes. Okay, that's wonderful. And so maybe, Marcelo, you can show us a little more about the unique abilities and effects and how you configure it all for each weapon and the character.
Sure.
Scythe.
Scythe specifically.
Yeah. Well, I can say that this process in general went through a lot of iteration as well.
Yeah.
And also it was important, like, for the design of the weapons to just like do an initial version of the weapon, let it sit, and then come back to it later to have the feel of like, does this weapon feel complete? Does the gameplay feel different? Should we change this in any way, or like, what about the upgrades and all that? So and throughout this process, we also were improving little bit by little bit how we do our own process of like changing the abilities and testing them in Unity as well. So we, again, Kira, which is the combat expert, created this state machine where we can set a separate, we can set a sequence of moves that creates a combo, right? So then we would, so if you type like light attack, which is A here, light attack, it would, this is a combo that Scythe has. And then it's the same for all the others. Most of our combos work that way. Like you have one with all the light attacks, and then you increasingly add the heavy attack in the end until like you get like the heavy attack.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the design of it. Because back when we started making the game, we initially had more of a memorize the combo. Like, oh, if you do YYXA with this character, they'll do a special. It was almost more of a fighting game style combo system. But we found on the PAX floor especially, and when we did play tests internally, that people just didn't want to engage with it in that way. And it's a little bit of a hardcore, or not hardcore, but like old school way of thinking about combos anyways, like very artificial. Like what is so special about XXYA? Like that's not a magic rune inscribed on anyone's forehead, right? Like it's just an artificial set of buttons. So instead, I went through and sort of studied a lot of dungeon crawlers, and I found, and there's this feeling that happens when you move to heavy attacks, where it feels like, okay, I've slowed down, I'm committing to like finishers, and so that's what we ended up implementing for all the characters. Is you can do a combo that's all light attacks, but as soon as you start doing heavy attacks, you're in the heavy attack chain at that point. And once we sort of solidified that across all the characters, we could ask, okay, well, what's actually different about these characters? If they all follow this logic, well, they all need different finishers and they all need different upgrades. But the logic of what is a light attack and what is a heavy attack and how do those two things relate? Once we could say that that's all the same, then the tech that Marcella was showing became much easier to then read and show as a designer.
Yeah, so then for the implementation of the character themselves, this is how we did the outline for our inspector. Usually, so like every character is a bit different, but usually we separate into 3 tabs where we have the light attacks, the heavy attacks, and the upgrades. And so for each attack, so these are the combo references, but then for each of these moves, we have an anticipation part, a delivery part, and something else. And then we can set animations here, sounds, how long does it take, and a projectile. And the projectile is a separate thing, which is like the actual hitbox that will detect collision with enemies and all that, and it's a prefab, right? And also the effects, like the visual effects and everything, are in this prefab. But basically, this system, the way it works is it will play an animation for anticipation, will play an animation for delivery, and spawn a projectile. And so this way, we can, once we have the setup of what we want for a combo, we would place it like this. And also for the heavies, and once we, like heavy attacks has a lot because once you start with the light and start moving into the heavies, like we wanted all the moves to be different and look different. So we have more of the heavies. And then the upgrades, which is a bit more complicated because each character is very specific. So this couldn't be done generically. It's just this is just a tab for you to add the effects and the prefabs for visual effects. So like actual effects and visual effects for every character's upgrades. And this is just a reference for the code to use because this has to be really implemented in a way that is specific to each character.
I see. And you also in these tabs input like the damage for each of these specific attacks? Because I noticed I saw like time and speed, but I didn't see damage anywhere.
Yeah, that's controlled by the projectile itself.
Oh, okay.
So we have a very generic class called projectile that does a lot of stuff. So like has like if it should be spawned with an offset, like how big is the radius, how long does it last, the speed, knockback, damage, color, if it should reflect projectiles, if it should block projectiles. So all of that is done in the projectile prefab.
Nice. So here you can really make each attack like even more unique with this like drop down.
Yeah.
Right.
We found that this was generic enough for each character because we could keep that structure that I showed before generic, and every character would have it. But then the projectiles is where you could set the specific stuff.
Okay, cool. So then going back to a question that somebody had earlier, did the writers decide on these effects, or was it something that happened during? And then how, I'm assuming that with this tool, it's pretty easy to come in and like change the effects just because you said, it's like a generic kind of way of like implementing them.
So we had a rough draft of the 4 basic characters, like I said, in the old combo system. And that definitely took the most iterations to get back to where it was. But then Scythe is a good example of a character that we drew up completely in the new system. And the way that process worked was I, as the designer, would say, okay, this is the goal of how we want this character to feel. We want Scythe to feel heavy. We want them to feel both like they're calculated, but also that they have a magical component. Like that's important to their feeling, is this like weight. And we were also like, there should be something about death in there because that's a heavy element of their character development. And then I would go through and propose like, okay, this is what I think that their combo finishers should work like. Like, are they more of a ranged character? Do they have finishers that are a wider area or that have special effects? And we came up with the idea of the gravity well. And then the upgrades are, okay, so of those different things, which what are the choices that you're making? What are the different builds that you might want to play around with based on the kinds of challenges you're seeing and the kinds of problems you're having wielding them? And so I show that to my team members, Kira, Marcelo, and Sin would all look through it, think through it, and think, you know what, I think with this pair, for example, this upgrade step, everyone's going to pick B. Like nobody's ever going to pick A if this is the choice you're giving them. And then I'd be like, oh yeah, that's true. And then I'd tweak this and that, or they'd point out, oh, this is actually exactly the same as what S-Stock is doing at this step or something like that. And we would have to make it a little bit different or a little bit more balanced in terms of the overall approach. Occasionally I'd have an idea that was just a little bit too out there and I'd have to change it entirely. But a lot of times I'd already sort of precede the list of finishers and upgrades with alternative examples of like, well, if we can't do any one of these for some reason, here's a few more that we can sort of try to play around and slot in there. And then they would go and implement that. Typically, there wouldn't need to be a lot of back and forth at that point because they know the design goals, they know my suggested implementation. Sin and Marcelo and Kira would go make the weapon with placeholders first. Sin would make some placeholder effects. And then towards the end of the 2 weeks, put in real art, and it would basically be playable at that point. And then if there was any weirdness we discovered in playtesting, like, oh, gravity wells aren't useful enough in this situation, or, oh, they just feel too slow, like it's kind of miserable. Then we have to go through and tweak a few things. But generally, yeah, we'd have the design overview, the implementation, and then an iteration after it's been implemented to play through and see what feels off.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, you've given us like such a great like deep look into the combat system and a lot of the technical challenges you've had. I'm wondering what might be one of the biggest technical challenges that you've had to face in building this game.
Right. Sure. So I would say the biggest technical challenge for me, at least, was implementing addressables in the game. And that was a solution that we decided to go for because of multiple reasons, but I could explain a little bit. So we had a target platform that had patch sizing issues, and also we wanted just to general. So like for those who don't know, Addressables is a way to pack your assets, and it also gives you, it's a Unity package that you can just download from the package manager. And it helps you in several different ways. It can help you manage memory. Also, it can help you with loading times, but it definitely has an influence on loading times, which can be better or worse depending on how you do it. It's pretty flexible. And also, it can help with patching size. So we wanted to reduce patching size. We wanted to be able to better control the memory, so better memory management, and also loading times. You always want better loading times, right? So looking at the options that we had, like Addressables was a clear winner. That's what we had to do. But changing a game that was already had its own structure to use Addressables was a pretty big challenge. I'm gonna do a few disclaimers here. So first of all, I can show you like exactly what we did for this game, but I am not an expert on Addressables. I was learning through the process as well, and specifically with Addressables, it's such a game specific thing that like there is no like clear way of implementing it. You have to do it for your exact requirements, and we had these requirements. So we set like looking, like once the game was pretty much at a state where it couldn't be like completely, wasn't going to be using double the memory that we were using already, or like the size wouldn't be double the size that it was. Like we looked at it and we said, okay, our target is going to be, we want to be below 2 gigabytes of memory, and loading times should not be excessive. For example, if you think about the Switch console, you can install the game on a memory card that is very difficult to control, like the loading time, because the person can just put a very low quality memory card. So all of that, like, we have to optimize as much as we can, but we also don't have like full control. But we wanted it, to load fast on Xbox and most PCs. So for us, we set our targets, which was lower than 2 gigabytes in memory and satisfactory loading times, and also the patch sizing. We wanted to like avoid having 600 megabytes patches every time that we updated the game. So yeah, I can show you the work that we had to do.
The audio was fun.
Yes, so audio was a major thing. And I can give you a hint. For example, one of the things that we went through was to set all the music to streaming, all the voices to streaming, any sound in the game that did not need to be to have like a fast snap response. We would set it to streaming. Setting it to streaming, what it does is that the sound will play whenever it's available. And so it will load during runtime, which means that, it for combat, that doesn't work at all, because you will hit, like, you need the sound to be there immediately. But for other things like the voice, like, it's okay if it's a few milliseconds later. If the music is a few milliseconds later, it's okay. But for snappy sounds, it doesn't work. But the biggest part of the work was to separate many assets of our game into these groups. So as you can see, there are many groups. We separated like videos into their own groups, and then we have audios. But then usually. Then it's very game dependent. And that's why I wanted to see the disclaimer, because this is the way that we did it to achieve our specific goals. But it might not even be the best way to do it for our game, but it's just for the situation that we were in. That's how we found that was the best one. And the way that it works is once you have an update, it will change one of the packages, right? So you have to identify which packages or which parts of your game are going to change the most and which parts are pretty static. So, for example, we know that fonts is very static. I'll never change this package. Videos are also very static. But for example, portraits, I'm expecting this package to change, because once we add a DLC like this, for sure, it will change. But for example, we wanted in the end, when we did our first patch, we decided to keep, which is another strategy for addressables. You can keep the portraits in one package unchanged and then add new portraits to another package. That's what we did here. Yeah, so the hardest part was actually separating these. And because the game was so referenced, everything, all the prefabs referenced each other, it was difficult it is a lot of work, and you have to really understand like what is connecting to what in your game to try to separate. Because what is going to happen in the end is that usually when you make a scene, you will add your prefabs here, you'll add your objects, and everything will be loaded up front, right? And once you separate them, they will be loaded not up front anymore. They will be loaded asynchronously, and they will also be loaded in a different order. So your code might break because you were expecting something to load first and something else later. Or you were expecting everything to be loaded in memory during your initialization. It's not loaded anymore. So just to show you an example, this is what our world scene looks like. So it is. Just see, yeah. So it was a lot of objects that were in our world scene, especially in the UI. we have the world scene is a scene in our game where it has like all the permanent objects that stay there and basically never leave. Like they're loaded once and never again. And this part here that I'm clicking is like all the separate prefabs that we had, and this was directly in the scene. And the biggest part of the work was to separate all of these each into their own package and their own package separately, basically. And so yeah, you beforehand the world scene had all of this in one shot, and I had to break it all into different packages. What also really helped for us was that all our dungeons were self-contained into scenes. So we have like a mall scene and a nightclub scene. Spoilers. And all the assets were already only referenced in these scenes, so it was much easier to package. Like they're not like spread out everywhere. So that part was easy. I would just say like, oh, there's one package for the nightclub, and whenever we make a little small change to the nightclub, it will update the whole package, and that's okay. Like we accepted that. And also for the mall. But the world scene was so big that we had to separate it into smaller chunks. And so the biggest chunk of the work was separating each one of these and then setting them into their groups here. And then another challenge that we faced was that once you add a lot of objects to the addressables, it starts to get slow to build. So it's a balance between what should go in an addressable and what should not go. And it's complicated. It's a lot of trial and error. But in the end, it gave us what we wanted, which was to be able to load what we want when we want and keep the memory below our target. And also help with the loading times, because once everything was spread out like this, what I did is I started masking the loading. So if I go, for example, in the animated logo page, which is animated logo scene, which is the first scene that once you really just open the game and it shows like our logo, the Kitfox Games logo. In this scene, oops, my inspector disappeared.
This was all made harder by the fact that we actually had submitted to consoles some months before coming out, and we did a bunch of audio changes after submitting. Yeah. So Marcelo's life was much more difficult as a result of us putting off our audio polish till the very last minute.
Yeah, so as I was saying, like once everything was set as addressables and separated into packages, I could mask the loading. So while we're showing the logo of the game, I'm already loading all of this stuff in the background. And it's loading permanently in memory, and like because I know that these objects will be permanent anyway, so that's something that we decided. And also then you load into the title screen, and then while in the title screen, like while you're, deciding what you want to do or looking at the settings, like it's loading a lot more stuff. So it's super masked because the user doesn't realize that like all the loading is being done before. Once you click new game, like there's almost everything is already loaded. And then like it jumps into the world scene as if there was no loading, right? So that really helped us reduce loading time as well. So yeah, I hope this helps someone.
It does.
I think it really does. I think for other developers, even they're looking at this, and even though they can't apply it the way exactly that you did, it still gives them some perspective to see how you solved your own problem, and maybe it'll give them that push to go figure it out for their own game.
Exactly.
So, very useful.
I mean, I would say that you have to give it the time that it takes, because it is a structural change. Especially for us, like we had the game, like this was done 5 months before launch. So you can imagine like the game had its already like its own structure, everything, all the prefabs were like spaghetti connected to each other. It was very hard to untangle. And I don't think I recommend doing it this way, like having the game pretty much ready and then break it down. Maybe it's better to start using addressables before. The thing is that addressables has an overhead as well. So when you're developing and you have to think about where this package is going and you have to split prefabs while you're developing, it has an overhead. So I'm a bit torn in like what is the best solution. And again, like this is very game specific. Like each person will decide what is best for them.
Right.
But
when you say overhead, are you talking about like hours, like of time put into it, or is it more like there's a technical overhead in terms of optimization?
Yeah, it's a technical overhead because for us, for example, if I go back to the world scene, just in terms of like editing the world scene, right now the world scene it doesn't have anything anymore. I don't have anything listed here because it's all going to be loaded later. Like it's all going to be loaded asynchronously. So I can't edit the stuff here anymore, right? Like before I made the switch, like we would have all the prefabs listed here and you could just click on it and edit it and change something. And because it's packed somewhere else, I have to go find it and like make sure that it actually, once I click play, like that it actually loads in the correct order, that it will actually not break when it's loaded, that it's all of that. So
to some extent, I feel like you almost have to do it at the end anyway. Like you have to do some percentage of it at the end anyway, when you can actually see the whole game in its total complexity. Because if you try to predict years in advance where the complexity will be, you have such a high chance of being wrong. And then, you trade in all this technical complexity of like, for me, I was able to do some bug fixing and testing much more easily when the world scene was more easily accessible and viewable. Now it's much harder for me as a non-programmer to be able to dive into some of the problems that we're seeing. And if that had been true for years, there would be this invisible production cost.
Yeah, so I guess there's a struggle of when do you start doing this? Maybe 4 months was too close to launch, but then doing it right at the beginning of the project is too early, and so finding the right.
So I would suggest like doing the work of understanding how it works early is useful. So like spending time like understanding addressables, doing some tests, like what if I had to change everything to addressables right now? Like how would that look like? And try out a few things and understand, okay, like these are the consequences, right? And then it gives you like a better view of like when's the best moment to do it.
It might also give you that foresight, so you'll make small decisions throughout in anticipation of when you actually have to put things down. Make it interesting. Yeah.
I would also like add that because we make console games and PC standalone games, it is a whole different world of compared to mobile. Okay, mobile, because you have like to download packages, there's like a remote server that downloads the packages. You have to organize it in a very different way. And also memory is more limited. There's many things that addressables will definitely help you with, but the structure that I use to in this game would not apply. It would have to be very different. Like I would not be able to like just load all of this stuff in memory permanently, for example. It's not something that would be advisable on mobile.
Yeah, I think for mobile developers, they've talked about this. It's like very important, that professionalization of code, because there is a lot of spaghetti code, but it's like being able to like really have really good basic code at the beginning, so that you can know that you will go back and like optimize a live. This is part of live ops, right? So it's like
exactly.
Thanks. We went over time because we were.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not. We're sorry for keeping you. We had a couple of questions from chat, if that's okay if we answer before we head off. But people were asking, you were talking a little bit earlier about like you were taking inspiration from the combat system and you played a lot of dungeon crawlers and whatnot. Were there any particular games that you took inspiration from for the combat system?
Various. I know I'm friends with the developers at Supergiant, and I talk to them about their games a lot. But as far as research, Hades wasn't really available to me until it was available commercially. So I can say we did look a good amount at Bastion. I know throughout the years. But they're various. I mean, I've played, a lot of Zeldas, a lot of different sword boy type games. Are there any that you liked to think about when you were evaluating the designs, Marcelo?
Well, I did play some dungeon crawlers as well, like during development, because the development was very long. But I do also remember.
I'm sorry, that was so loud.
It's okay. Bastion was also an inspiration for sure, just because of the feel. But I played lots of hack and slash, so I love Bayonetta and many of the Platinum games that have like really strong, intense combos. So in the beginning, when we were doing that type of combo structure, that was an inspiration. But then we decided to change it and become more like in the direction of Bastion, I guess.
Nice, thanks. And I had another question about the branching narrative structure. Adian asked earlier, is like, what principles or rules inform your design decisions concerning how much branching would be in the game?
That was definitely part of following the game's overall pillars and vision, because the vision of the game was that it's a playful romance fantasy. And when we started building out our very first prototype, I would draft an example date. I was saying, well, here's how an example date might work with someone that you're wooing. And how much control should you have over them as a character versus what's happening to you as a person? And that's sort of a writing decision and sort of a gameplay decision, right? Like, I think it's really weird sometimes in dating sims where, like, if you choose option B, like, they become a completely different person and like change their lives because you told them that you liked spaghetti and now they're obsessed with spaghetti or whatever it is. And so it was definitely a consideration of like, how do we walk that balance between them feeling like they're their own person and they're going to do what they're going to do, but also you get to have this impact on them that means so much to them. Like, how do you have a meaningful relationship within the structure of a dating sim at all is a whole other question. But the short answer is we play tested and figured out what felt pretty good. And then we reverse engineered, okay, these are the types of choices that feel good. And part of it also, I have to give a big shout out to Christine Love, which you should definitely check out. Her game hasn't come out yet, but it's very soon, called Get in the Car, Loser. But she wrote one of my favorite dating sims, Analog, A Hate Story, is fantastic. And I had a lot of long chats with her at the very beginning of the game's development about what kinds of choices players respond well to, what feels meaningful, and what kind of technical requirements those have. I know we played around a lot, for example, with giving the player stats based on their dialogue choices. Like, you get plus accuracy if you pick this one, or you get, like, if you pick the jerk option, then you get like plus damage, or if you pick the healing the nice option, you get like plus defense, or so. I don't know, whatever. We tried out various things like that, and in the end, we ripped it all out because it was interfering with people actually engaging with the characters as characters. But we went through so many iterations. That's a really good example of the kind of thing that we were like, okay, well, what types of branches do people enjoy? And typically, if there is a big branch, the game will like flag it. They'll be like, this is a very important decision. Are you totally sure that that's what you want? Otherwise, it's much more about sort of expressing yourself and seeing how the character responds to things, and not so much consequences. It's really about being in the moment and getting to know someone.
Yeah, that's really nice. I actually, that's the first thing I noticed. Narrative games and romancing type games are like getting a little bit of a spotlight right now because, obviously the Mass Effect series just got released, and let's all be serious, like that was basically for me a big dating sim. And those are so many of those moments. I didn't realize until I started watching people replay it, how many moments you're like, you knew that there'd be a consequence or a behavior that you wanted, and it was very easy to kind of trigger that. Whereas this game, it really felt like your characters were real people with real feelings, and didn't matter how much. And when you manipulated your behavior, they would respond to that in such a realistic way that it like kind of jarred me sometimes, and I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for sharing a ton of details about your game inside and out. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, feel free to jump into our Discord and ask questions, talk with the community there. We're also very active on Twitter. So hopefully we'll keep chatting with everybody and developers in the years to come.
Yeah.
Amazing. We're posting links to your Twitter, to the game, the Steam page, and everything in the chat. So jump on that.
Thank you so much. And that's it for Creator Spotlight this week, but we'll be back next week. We're going to be checking out Tiny Build's game, Secret Neighbor, a game that just got released, like a multiplayer game that was released as part of the Hello Neighbor series. So we're really excited to check this out. But again, thank you, Tanya and Marcella, for taking the time during your release to actually come and talk to us. It's really appreciated.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the great questions, chat. We'll see you next time.